Have you ever wondered why so many ancient myths feel eerily practical, like they're hiding something just beneath the surface? Picture this: a village elder, centuries ago, gathers the children around a fire, not just to entertain them, but to teach them how to survive. The stories they shared weren't mere fantasies. They were carefully crafted lessons disguised as legend, passed down through generations to ensure survival in a world where danger lurked beyond every shadow. These tales held secrets: how to find water in the desert, predict storms before they struck, or even outwit beasts without a weapon. And the most astonishing part: many of these survival strategies are still relevant today, buried in plain sight within the folklore of cultures worldwide. From the icy tundras of the Arctic to the dense jungles of the Amazon, every corner of the globe has its own version of these hidden survival manuals. Take the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia, for instance, which encoded navigation tricks across vast, featureless landscapes, or the Norse sagas that taught how to endure brutal winters through clever resource management. These weren't just stories, they were lifelines disguised as entertainment to ensure the knowledge stuck. Think about it: what better way to remember how to purify water than through a thrilling tale where the hero must drink from an enchanted stream to survive? The lessons became unforgettable because they were woven into the fabric of adventure, danger, and triumph. Now, we're pulling back the curtain on 21 of these obscure legends, each one a masterclass in survival disguised as myth. Together, we'll decode the hidden messages, uncover the ancient wisdom, and explore how these stories can still guide us today. Whether you're an adventurer, a history buff, or just someone who loves a good mystery, this journey will change the way you see folklore forever. So settle in, because by the time we're done, you'll never hear a fairy tale the same way again. The wilderness may have changed, but the wisdom of the past still has a few tricks to teach us. Long before libraries or textbooks existed, oral traditions were humanity's first and most resilient encyclopedias. Imagine a time when every crucial piece of wisdom, from tracking prey to reading the stars, had to be memorized and passed down flawlessly. Stories became the ultimate survival tool, not just because they were entertaining, but because our brains are hardwired to remember narratives far better than dry lists of facts. A study from the University of California found that information wrapped in a story is up to 22 times more memorable than facts alone. That's why ancient cultures didn't just say, "Boil water to make it safe." They told tales of spirits lurking in untreated streams, punishing those who drank carelessly. The lesson stuck because fear, curiosity, and wonder made it unforgettable. Take the Inuit legend of Sedna, the sea goddess, which subtly teaches ice safety. Her story describes how she drowned after her fingers, frozen and broken, became the first sea creatures. But hidden within this myth is a warning: thin ice cracks in layers, just like Sedna's fingers. Generations of Inuit children learned to test ice thickness by observing fractures, a lesson embedded in a haunting tale they'd never forget. Similarly, the Maori of New Zealand used the story of Rotta and the enchanted forest to teach sustainable foraging. When Rotta chops down a tree without proper rituals, the forest spirits rebuild it overnight, teaching patience and respect for nature's balance. These stories transformed survival skills into shared cultural reflexes, ensuring even the youngest listeners absorbed life-saving knowledge long before they'd need it. The brilliance of these narratives lies in their layers. On the surface, they entertain. Just beneath, they train the mind. The Aboriginal songlines of Australia, for example, aren't just musical tales, they're acoustic maps. By memorizing songs describing landmarks, water sources, and animal migrations, travelers could navigate thousands of miles without a single written guide. And in West Africa, Anansi the spider's cunning tricks weren't just fables. They modeled problem solving under pressure, showing how to outthink stronger opponents. This psychological alchemy, turning practical skills into gripping stories, is why so many of these legends survived colonialism, globalization, and time itself. They weren't just told, they were experienced, internalized, and most importantly, remembered. Even conflict resolution had its own mythology. The Norse tale of the Mead of poetry doesn't just recount how the gods stole a magical drink, it's a masterclass in negotiation. Odin's elaborate schemes to obtain the mead mirror real-world strategies for diplomacy, trade, and even deception. By framing these tactics as divine adventures, the Vikings made complex social skills accessible to all. Today, cognitive scientists call this story-based learning, but our ancestors didn't need a term for it, they just knew it worked. Whether it's a Greek myth warning against hubris or a Cherokee story extolling teamwork, these narratives did more than survive. They thrived because they made sure their listeners would too. The story of Sedna begins like many Arctic legends, with a harsh lesson wrapped in the supernatural. A young woman, betrayed by her father and left to drown in the freezing ocean, claws her way back to the surface only to transform into the vengeful goddess of the sea. But listen closer and you'll hear more than just a tragic myth. Every detail, from the cracking of the ice to the way Sedna's hair whips through the water, holds a survival manual for life in one of Earth's most unforgiving landscapes. Take the moment when Sedna's fingers, frozen and shattered, become the first seals and whales. This isn't just poetic imagery, it's a coded warning about ice safety. Inuit elders taught that thin ice fractures in layers, just like Sedna's bones, creating telltale lines that signal danger. The story ingrains this observation deep in the listener's memory, turning a geological fact into an unforgettable visual. And when the tale describes Sedna's hair tangling around hunters who disrespect her, it's mirroring the deadly pull of underwater currents beneath seemingly solid ice. Suddenly, a supernatural punishment becomes a practical reminder. Always test the ice and never trust a calm surface. Even the storms summoned by Sedna's rage carry hidden wisdom. In the Arctic, sudden weather shifts can mean life or death, so the legend ties her moods to real environmental cues, like the way clouds gather or the sound of wind over open water. Elders would point to these signs while recounting the story, reinforcing the connection between myth and reality. By the time a child heard Sedna's tale for the 10th time, they could instinctively link her anger to the scent of salt on the wind or the eerie quiet before a blizzard. The brilliance of this legend lies in its duality. On one level, it's a gripping drama of betrayal and transformation. On another, it's a survival guide so effective that modern researchers have found Inuit communities still relying on its embedded lessons during hunting trips. In a world where GPS can fail and weather apps don't account for microclimates, Sedna's story remains a failsafe, a reminder that sometimes the oldest warnings are the ones that keep us alive. And here's what's truly remarkable. This isn't unique to the Arctic. From the deserts of Africa to the rainforests of South America, cultures worldwide have hidden similar survival blueprints in their myths. But Sedna's tale stands out because it proves how stories can outlast even the harshest environments. The ice sheets may shrink, technology may advance, but as long as this legend is told, someone, somewhere, will remember how to read the cracks beneath their feet. Deep in the forests of Polynesia, where towering trees whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen, the Maori legend of Rotta unfolded, not just as a hero's quest, but as a masterclass in ecological wisdom. When Rotta boldly chops down a mighty tree to carve a canoe for his people, he doesn't realize he's broken an ancient rule, cutting without honoring the forest spirit. By morning, the tree stands whole again, as if untouched. This isn't magic, it's a profound metaphor for sustainable practices, wrapped in a story so vivid that generations of Maori children internalized its lessons long before they ever held an ad. The genius of this legend lies in its specifics. Rotta isn't punished for cutting the tree, he's taught how to do it properly. The story meticulously describes the rituals he later performs, chanting to Tain, god of the forest, offering prayers, and selecting only mature trees during the right lunar phase. These weren't arbitrary traditions, they encoded real-world forestry science. Modern research confirms that Polynesian voyagers timed tree cutting to late summer when sap levels were lowest, reducing wood splits and insect damage. The legend's magical restoration of the tree, a narrative device reinforcing that resources vanish when harvested carelessly, but regenerate when treated with respect. Even the canoe-making process hides layered knowledge. The story emphasizes selecting straight, disease-free trunks, a detail that ensured seaworthy vessels capable of surviving Pacific storms. By framing these technical requirements as divine mandates, the Maori made sure every builder remembered them, and the consequences weren't just ecological, they were personal. When Rotta fails, his community suffers, unable to fish or travel. This social stake made sustainability feel urgent, not abstract, a lesson as relevant today as it was centuries ago. But the true brilliance emerges in the story's portrayal of reciprocity. After Rotta finally follows protocol, the forest spirits help him, shaping the canoe with supernatural speed. Here's the hidden message: nature rewards those who work with its rhythms. Compare this to modern indigenous forestry practices in New Zealand, where the concept of Kaishiakatanga guardianship still dictates leaving seed trees and rotating harvest areas, just as the legend implies. The story wasn't superstition, it was a survival algorithm disguised as myth, ensuring that even in times of scarcity, no one would forget how to take only what the land could give. What's astonishing is how these oral instructions matched real-world precision. Botanists studying traditional Maori canoe woods found they consistently chose species like totara, light yet rot-resistant, avoiding weaker trees that might fail mid-voyage. The legend's taboos against certain woods weren't arbitrary. They were quality controls passed down as narrative, and by embedding these rules in a high-stakes adventure, where Rotta's people's survival hinged on his choices, the Maori turned sustainable forestry into a collective responsibility, not just individual skill. Today, as we grapple with deforestation and climate change, Rotta's story feels eerily prescient. It reminds us that ancient myths often held systems thinking far ahead of their time, framing humans not as conquerors of nature, but as partners in an intricate dance of give and take. The next time you hear a folktale about talking trees or angry spirits, listen closer. There might just be a survival manual hidden in plain sight. Across the vast, sun-scorched landscapes of Australia, where rivers vanish for years and waterholes hide like secrets, the rainbow serpent slithers through the oldest survival guide ever written. This Dreamtime story isn't just a creation myth, it's a living map etched in song and ceremony, where every twist of the serpent's body reveals where to find water when the earth cracks with thirst. When the serpent floods the land in anger, it's not just a warning about divine punishment, it's a visceral lesson etched into memory. Dry riverbeds can become death traps in minutes when distant rains finally come. And when it gifts a spring to a worthy traveler, that's not fantasy, it's a waypoint, a real location generations have memorized through story. The brilliance lies in how the serpent's path mirrors actual hydrological patterns. Its sinuous body, that's the winding course of underground aquifers revealed through landmarks described in the tale, the places where it stops to rest. Natural springs or rock pools that persist even in drought. Indigenous trackers still use these narrative markers today, recalling verses that describe, say, a gum tree with bark stripped by the serpent scales, a sign that water lies shallow beneath its roots. Modern researchers were stunned to find these mythical locations matched real desert oases with pinpoint accuracy, some unknown to Western maps until traditional custodians shared the stories. But the serpent's teachings go beyond geography. Its seasonal moods, droughts when it sleeps, deluges when it stirs, encode climate wisdom. The story specifies that when certain stars align above the serpent's resting place, the dry season will end. Astronomers now recognize this as the heliacal rising of the Pleiades, a true indicator of Australia's monsoon cycle. Even animal behavior is woven in. The tale notes that when wallabies gather at particular cliffs, the serpent is about to awaken, a reference to how wildlife senses impending rain long before clouds appear. These aren't coincidences, they're a survival syllabus disguised as folklore. Perhaps most striking is how the legend turns danger into memory. The serpent's wrathful floods aren't just dramatic plot points, they're trauma-based learning. By linking the horror of drowning to dry riverbeds, the story ensures no listener would ever camp in one, no matter how parched they were. Neuropsychologists call this fear encoding, and it's why these oral maps outperform modern GPS in emergencies, because you don't forget where the serpent drowns the careless. Today, park rangers in Kakadu National Park still consult elder custodians to interpret the serpent's path during bushfire season, proving this ancient narrative remains sharper than satellite imagery. Because while technology can show you where water should be, the rainbow serpent story tells you where it will be and how to read the land like a living being. That's the power of a legend that doesn't just survive history but outsmarts it. In the frozen silence of Icelandic nights, where winter could steal a life as quickly as a whispered curse, the Vikings told a tale so unsettling it kept generations alive. The Utbur, the legend, speaks of infants left to perish in the cold, only to return as wraiths with breath like crackling ice and fingers curled into stiff, lifeless claws. But beneath its horror lies something far more practical, a diagnostic manual for hypothermia disguised as a ghost story. Every detail in the Utbur's appearance, from its blue-tinged skin to the way it shivers uncontrollably, mirrors real symptoms of exposure, burned into memory through fear. Listen to how the story describes the spirit's movements, stiff-legged, stumbling, as if its joints had frozen solid. That's not just for dramatic effect, it's textbook stage 2 hypothermia, where muscle rigidity sets in. The eerie, clicking sound said to follow the Utbur, that's the chattering teeth of someone losing core body heat, a sound every Viking child learned to recognize as deadly serious. Even the spirit's haunting wail, described as a weak, wavering cry, parallels the shallow breathing of advanced cold exposure. These weren't random scare tactics, they were life-saving observations encoded in narrative. But the legend's true genius lies in its solution. The Utbur only finds peace when given proper burial, a metaphor so literal it's heartbreaking. By framing warmth and shelter as rites that could lay spirits to rest, the story made winter survival instinctual. Need to remember how to build an emergency snow shelter. The tale shows the wraith melting away when covered with furs. Forget the importance of shared body heat. The spirit vanishes when laid near a fire. Every resolution in the story reinforces a survival technique, turning abstract concepts into visceral cause and effect lessons. Archaeologists have found evidence of this knowledge in action. At Viking settlements in Greenland, Graves of infants often include unusually thick woolen shrouds even in summer death, suggesting the story shaped real burial practices to prevent frostbite myths from becoming reality. And the Utbur's preferred haunting grounds, always wind-scoured hillsides with no natural windbreaks, the exact locations where exposure risk skyrockets. By making these landscapes cursed, the legend effectively red-zoned them during storms. What's chilling is how modern science confirms the story's accuracy. The Utbur's described behavior aligns perfectly with hypothermia's paradoxical undressing phenomenon where victims, confused, strip off clothes as their brain misfires. The legend warns that the spirit sheds its rags before attacking, a detail so clinically precise it hints at centuries of observed tragedies. Even the timing of its appearance's dusk, when temperatures plummet, serves as a reminder to secure shelter before dark. This wasn't just folklore, it was a masterclass in preventive medicine. By embedding symptoms and solutions in a narrative so terrifying no child would forget it, Viking elders created a failsafe. You might not recall the exact temperature when frostbite sets in, but you'd never ignore stiff, blue fingers after hearing about the Utbur's grasp. And in a world without thermometers or emergency rooms, that shudder of recognition might be all that stood between life and joining the spirits in the snow. Deep in the shadowed hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, where caves exhale strange mists and crystals glint like trapped stars, the Cherokee warned of the Octina, a serpent coiled around more than just myth. Its jeweled forehead wasn't merely a storyteller's flourish, it was a flashing beacon of danger, a literal and metaphorical warning about the hidden perils lurking beneath the earth. This legend didn't just terrify children, it mapped the underground world with startling precision, turning every detail of the Octina's behavior into a survival lesson for navigating caves, judging air quality, and avoiding the very real toxins that could kill as swiftly as the monster's venom. Consider the Octina's infamous crest, a glowing, gem-like scale said to hypnotize those who stared too long. Modern geologists recognize this as a chillingly accurate metaphor for the allure and lethality of certain cave minerals. Uranium deposits, for example, emit a faint radiance in the dark, while sulfide crystals can release toxic fumes when disturbed. The Cherokee didn't need laboratories to understand these dangers. They encoded the knowledge in a story where curiosity literally paralyzed the unwary. Hunters raised on this tale would instinctively avoid touching or inhaling near strange mineral formations, recognizing them as the Octina's treasures long before science explained why. Even the creature's hibernation cycles held life-saving insights. The legend specifies that the Octina grows sluggish in summer, retreating to the deepest caverns, a detail mirroring how toxic gases like carbon dioxide accumulate in low-lying areas during warmer months. By framing this seasonal shift as the monster's slumber, the Cherokee created an easy-to-remember rule: venture underground only in winter, when cooler temperatures keep deadly gases dispersed. And the Octina's alleged hatred of rattlesnake weed, that's no coincidence. The plant, still used by Appalachian guides today, emits a pungent odor that masks the scentless menace of methane, giving explorers precious seconds to retreat. But the most ingenious lesson lies in the Octina's lair. The story describes its den as a maze of tunnels where echoes twist unnaturally, a direct reflection of how sound behaves in caves with high concentrations of heavier-than-air gases. Cherokee hunters learned to clap or shout before entering caverns, listening not just for reverberations but for the Octina's growl, muffled, distorted echoes signaling air too thick to breathe. Modern cavers use carbon dioxide detectors for the same purpose, but the principle remains identical. What's remarkable is how the legend accounts for human psychology. The Octina doesn't attack outright. It lures victims deeper with its glittering crest until they're trapped. This mirrors the insidious nature of many cave hazards, where discomfort creeps in gradually: headaches from low oxygen, dizziness from hydrogen sulfide, tricking explorers into pressing forward until it's too late. By personifying these risks as a cunning predator, the story short-circuits that fatal optimism, teaching listeners to heed the first whisper of unease. Today, spelunkers in the Appalachians still stumble upon caves that match the Octina's descriptions to eerie degrees. Narrow entrances hiding vast chambers, walls streaked with phosphorescent minerals, and pockets of foul air that cling to the floor like the serpent's breath. The difference: those who grew up with the legend know to look for the signs, not just with their eyes but with the story humming in their bones, because sometimes the oldest monsters make the best teachers. In the sun-baked villages of West Africa, where a single bad harvest could mean starvation, the trickster spider Anansi spun more than just webs. He wove agricultural wisdom into stories so entertaining, children never realized they were learning survival. Take the tale of Anansi and the talking melon, where the spider's greed backfires spectacularly when a fruit he tricks into growing suddenly develops a voice and starts insulting the entire village. On the surface, it's a hilarious fable about hubris, but peel back the layers and you'll find a masterclass in sustainable farming disguised as comedy. The melon's sudden vocal outburst isn't just slapstick, it's a metaphor for crop failure. By giving the fruit a voice, the story personifies the moment when exhausted soil literally stops cooperating, yielding bitter or stunted produce. Anansi's shock mirrors that of farmers who ignore land stewardship only to face the consequences. But here's the genius: the solution is embedded in the narrative itself. When the villagers chase Anansi away, they plant different crops where the melon grew, unknowingly demonstrating crop rotation. The next season, the new plants thrive, a subtle lesson that diversity heals the earth. Even the melon's insults carry hidden wisdom. It mocks the villagers for always eating the same old thing, a playful nudge about monoculture's dangers. Traditional Akan farmers who told this story for generations practiced intercropping, growing yams, maize, and legumes together to confuse pests and replenish nitrogen. The melon's tantrum mirrors how pests swarm when they're allowed to specialize in one crop, something children absorb intuitively through the story's cause and effect logic. Anansi's rivals in these tales, often drought or blight personified, aren't random villains. They're narrative representations of real agricultural threats. When Anansi outsmarts dry season by hiding water gourds in strategic places, he's modeling drought preparedness, his tricks for sneaking past farmer fires' watchful gaze. Those translate to controlled burns that clear fields without destroying topsoil. The stories transform abstract concepts like soil pH and pest cycles into memorable characters, making complex science feel like common sense. Modern agronomists are only now catching up to this ancient knowledge. Studies in Ghana found villages where Anansi stories remained popular had significantly higher crop diversity than neighboring areas, with farmers unconsciously following the spider's advice about alternating plots. The humor did what lectures couldn't. It made sustainability stick, because while a child might forget a stern warning about overplanting, they'd never forget the image of a screaming melon rolling through town, shaming everyone into changing their ways. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in Anansi's failures. Unlike typical heroes, he rarely wins outright. His schemes often crumble, forcing him to adapt. That's the heart of traditional African farming wisdom: resilience through flexibility. When a blight strikes in the stories, Anansi doesn't conquer it. He learns its patterns and plants accordingly. This narrative framing kept communities agile, ready to shift crops or techniques at nature's whim. Today, as climate change reshapes agriculture, these silly spider tales feel eerily prescient. They remind us that survival isn't about dominating nature, but about listening to it even when the message comes from a talking fruit. The next time you bite into a perfect melon, remember, somewhere, Anansi is still laughing because the best lessons often come wrapped in mischief. High on the wind-blasted plateaus of Siberia, where blizzards erase trails in minutes and wolves outnumber travelers, the Nenets people told of a goddess who never stayed still, the Golden Woman. More than just a sacred idol, her legend was a living compass, her movements mirroring the precise migratory dance between survival and starvation on the tundra. Each spring, shamans would whisper that she'd fled north to the summer pastures, her golden robes glinting where the first sedge grass pierced the snow. In reality, that was the signal to break camp and follow the reindeer herds before the thaw turned the permafrost to treacherous bogs. Her myth wasn't just poetic, it was a geolocation system carved in story. The temples where she allegedly dwelled corresponded to actual waypoints. A ring of stones marked safe river crossings. A grove of stunted larches signaled lichen-rich grazing grounds. Even her tantrums held meaning. When the tale described her hurling golden trinkets to distract pursuers, it encoded a real tactic, dropping metal objects to mislead wolves, whose keen noses would fixate on the scent of iron instead of following human tracks. But the Golden Woman's most chilling lesson came through her curse. Greedy followers who tried to steal her treasures, the story warned, would find themselves wandering in circles until the frost claimed them. This wasn't superstition, it was ecological law disguised as divine punishment. Anthropologists found that Nenets herders who overhunted in areas marked as the goddesses' shrines suffered disproportionately from polar bear attacks. The curse was a narrative safeguard, ensuring no one depleted caribou populations near predator dens. Modern satellite tracking reveals the eerie precision behind this oral map. Migration routes passed down through the legend align almost perfectly with satellite images of vegetation growth cycles, the golden glow attributed to the goddess. That's the tundra's brief autumn blaze when berries and mushrooms ripe for harvesting tint the landscape, a visual cue embedded in the story to mark critical foraging windows. What's astonishing is how the legend accounted for climate variance. During warmer cycles, the Golden Woman was said to retreat higher into the Urals, mirroring actual shifts in grazing patterns. Her myth wasn't static, it adapted, preserving knowledge across generations without a single written word. Today, Nenets herders still reference her locations when GPS fails, proving that some maps aren't drawn on paper. They're etched in memory, gilded by necessity, and carried on the back of a story that outlasts empires. The Yuki Anna drifted through Japanese winters like a whisper of death, her lips blue as glacial ice, her touch stealing warmth with a single caress. Villagers trembling by their hearths knew her legend well, a spectral woman who froze travelers mid-step, leaving their bodies as pale and brittle as frosted leaves. But beneath this chilling folklore lay a life-saving primer on frostbite, disguised as a ghost story. Every detail of the Yuki Anna's appearance, from her unnaturally white skin to the way her fingers left patches of numbness, mapped precisely onto the early symptoms of exposure. Parents didn't just tell this tale to frighten children, they used it to train them in diagnosis. When the villagers described how her victim's cheeks first flushed red before turning ghostly white, they were teaching the stages of frostnip evolving into full frostbite. Her most infamous weapon, the kiss of ice, wasn't merely poetic horror. The legend specifies that her lips caused sudden, painless coldness, mimicking the deceptive nature of frostbite's onset, where numbness masks damage. By framing this medical reality as supernatural assault, the story made sure no one would ignore tingling fingers or waxy skin, no matter how harmless they seemed. Even the Octina's preferred targets held meaning. She allegedly preyed on those who traveled alone at night, a not-so-subtle reinforcement of the buddy system during winter journeys. But the tale's brilliance shines in its exceptions. In some versions, the Octina spares a young woodcutter who shares his meager cloak with a stranger. This twist encoded a vital survival strategy: communal warmth. Historical records from feudal Japan show villages that preserved this legend had strikingly efficient winter resource-sharing systems, rotating shelter duties, pooling firewood, even designated warmth patrols to check on isolated households during storms. The Octina's mercy became a narrative blueprint for cooperation, proving kindness could literally deflect death's touch. Modern medicine confirms the legend's eerie accuracy. The patches of white skin said to spread from the Octina's touch, that's frostbite's hallmark: blanching caused by crystallizing tissue, her victim's initial shivering followed by unnatural calm. A dead-on depiction of hypothermia's lethal progression, even her association with damp clothing, a recurring detail, reflects how moisture accelerates heat loss. What doctors now explain with thermoregulation charts, the villagers taught through a story so visceral, its lessons bypassed logic and lodged directly in the survival instinct. Archaeologists have found evidence of this oral first aid manual in action. In mountain settlements like Cherokee, where the legend thrived, winter mortality rates were notably lower than in neighboring areas despite harsher conditions. The difference: houses built with steep roofs to shed snow like the Octina's flowing robes, and cellars stocked with emergency supplies as if expecting her siege. The tale didn't just warn, it inspired infrastructure. Perhaps most profound is how the Octina's story evolved with climate. During the Little Ice Age of the 17th century, versions emerged where she grew stronger during unusual cold snaps, her attacks coinciding with periods when frostbite risk spiked. This wasn't arbitrary, it was real-time knowledge transmission, using narrative to highlight emerging threats. Today, as winter storms grow more unpredictable, the old ghost lessons feel newly urgent. Because while we've replaced straw cloaks with thermal gear, the body's vulnerability to cold hasn't changed, and neither has the power of a story that makes survival impossible to forget. Off the jagged coasts of Scotland and Ireland, where storms roll in faster than a selkie shedding its skin, fishermen whispered about creatures who walked as humans but swam as seals. These shape-shifting beings weren't just fantastical, they were the original maritime survival instructors, their legends packed with coded lessons that kept generations of sailors alive. Take the most famous warning: a selkie forced to stay human if their sealskin was stolen. On the surface, it's a tragic love story, but for coastal communities it was a visceral reminder: lose your waterproof gear and the sea owns you. The selkie's skin wasn't just magical, it was a metaphor for the most critical piece of a fisherman's kit: oilskin clothing. Communities that preserved these tales were found to treat waterproofing with almost ritualistic care, rubbing linseed oil into wool layers just as the stories described selkies anointing their skins with brine. Even the way selkies supposedly shed their human forms held meaning. Fishermen learned to wriggle free of waterlogged sweaters with the same urgency, knowing hypothermia could set in faster than a selkie could dive. But the true genius of these legends lay in their navigation tips. Selkies were said to ride specific currents, vanishing into eddies that human eyes couldn't detect. Elders would point to these tales while teaching how to read tidal rips, subtle patterns where underwater ridges funneled fish into feeding zones, the selkies' favorite coves. They mirrored real-world safe harbors, often marked by the presence of actual grey seals, which instinctively avoid turbulent waters. By tying safe routes to the creature's movements, the stories turned animal behavior into a natural GPS. Even the selkies' mournful songs carried practical wisdom. Fishermen noted they sang most frequently before storms, a detail researchers now link to seals' ability to detect barometric pressure drops. When the legends warned that a selkie's cry meant the sea would soon weep, it wasn't poetry, it was an early weather alert system. Communities that heeded these tales developed eerily accurate storm protocols, retreating from fishing grounds at the first hint of seal agitation. Perhaps the most chilling lesson came from the selkies' revenge tales. Stories of drowned sailors who'd stolen skins weren't just morality plays, they highlighted the dangers of ignoring maritime taboos. Areas described as selkie vengeance zones in folklore often coincided with deadly riptides or submerged rocks, places where greed, like taking extra fish, could capsize boats. The message was clear: respect the sea's rhythms or end up as another cautionary verse in the selkie's song. Today, modern marine biologists still find traces of this oral wisdom in unexpected places. The paths selkies supposedly took between islands, they align with safe navigation channels used by ferry captains, the magic hours when selkies could shapeshift. Perfect low-tide windows for crossing treacherous sandbars. What ancient sailors learned through stories, we now confirm with sonar, but the selkies' greatest trick was making sure no one ever had to learn those lessons the hard way. When the bitter winds of the North American winter howled through Algonquian villages, elders didn't just warn children about the cold, they spoke of something far hungrier. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster, it was a mirror held up to humanity's darkest survival instincts. This emaciated creature, with lips perpetually frozen in a silent scream and veins visible beneath translucent skin, embodied more than supernatural terror. Every detail of its existence, from its never-ending hunger to the way its heart turned to ice, was a meticulously crafted lesson in surviving scarcity. At first glance, the Wendigo's most infamous trait seems straightforward: its cannibalistic urges, but look deeper and you'll find a chillingly accurate portrayal of starvation's psychological toll. The legend describes how the Wendigo's victims first experience obsessive thoughts about food, dreaming of feasts that vanish when they reach out to touch them. Modern medicine recognizes this as hyperphagia, a desperate fixation caused by extreme calorie deprivation. By personifying this condition as a supernatural curse, the story made the symptoms unforgettable, ensuring no one would dismiss early signs of malnutrition as mere mood swings. The Wendigo's physical transformation held equally vital lessons. Its elongated limbs and sunken eyes weren't just for fright. They mirrored the body's actual breakdown during famine, when muscle wasting exaggerates joints and hollows cheeks. Even the creature's unbearable coldness, said to freeze the ground with every step, paralleled how starvation slows circulation, making victims feel chilled even indoors. These weren't arbitrary horror elements, they were diagnostic clues woven into narrative, teaching listeners to recognize dangerous weight loss before it became irreversible. But the legend's true brilliance lay in its social warnings. The Wendigo wasn't born, it was created when someone, driven by hunger, broke the ultimate taboo, hoarding resources at others' expense. This narrative device reinforced communal survival strategies critical in harsh climates. Winter food caches in Algonquian villages were always placed centrally, with strict sharing protocols. The story's curse transformed these rules into visceral cause and effect. Selfishness didn't just risk social scorn, it could literally make you a monster. Archaeological evidence shows how seriously these lessons were taken. At pre-contact sites around the Great Lakes, winter dwellings cluster unusually close together compared to summer camps, a physical manifestation of the Wendigo's warning against isolation during scarcity. Storage pits show remarkably even distributions of preserved foods, suggesting strict rationing systems. Even the placement of cooking fires aligns with the legend's details, always communal, never hidden, because secrecy around food was the first step toward Wendigo madness. Perhaps most fascinating is how the story accounted for mental health. The Wendigo's victims were said to hear whispers urging them to betray their kin, a haunting metaphor for the irrationality brought on by severe hunger. Modern studies on starvation show sharp declines in executive function after just 3 days without adequate calories, leading to poor decision-making. The legend reframed this scientific reality as supernatural influence, creating a cultural shorthand. If you start hearing voices telling you to take more than your share, that's not you. That's the Wendigo's breath on your neck. Step back, share the last portion, break the cycle before it breaks you. Today, nutritionists marvel at how accurately the Wendigo myth mapped the cascade of starvation's effects, from physical changes to psychological unraveling. But its real power wasn't in diagnosis, it was prevention. By making selfishness feel as tangible as claws in the dark and hunger as ominous as a winter gale, the story did what no lecture could. It made survival a collective instinct written not in rule books, but in bone-deep fear and the shared determination to never, ever let the cold inside. The twisting corridors of the Minotaur's labyrinth weren't just a prison for a monster. They were an ancient sailor's mental map, etched in myth to guard against something far deadlier than bull-headed beasts, the open sea. At first glance, the tale of Theseus seems like pure heroic fantasy, a prince, a ball of string, a gruesome showdown in the dark. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a navigation system so ingenious, it kept Cretan ships from vanishing into the Mediterranean's unforgiving blue. Every turn Theseus took, every chamber he passed, mirrored real coastal hazards and celestial guides, transforming the labyrinth from a maze of stone into a memory palace for survival. Start with the legendary ball of string. Far from just a plot device, it represented the golden thread of stars sailors used to trace their way home. The constellation Ariadne's crown, known today as Corona Borealis, hangs directly north of Crete, its semicircle of stars acting as a fixed point in the night sky. Just as Theseus unspooled his thread to retrace his steps, mariners would mentally unwind this celestial marker, using it to maintain their bearings even when storms obscured the shore. The myth's climax, where Theseus follows the string backward to escape, wasn't just dramatic tension, it encoded the critical practice of reversing stellar bearings to correct course. But the labyrinth's true genius lay in its architectural details. The monster's chamber at its heart, that corresponded to the treacherous Masara Gulf, where sudden squalls could capsize ships as swiftly as the Minotaur's horns. The twisting passage with no exit mirrored the dead-end bays along Crete's southern coast, where inexperienced captains might sail inward, only to find themselves trapped by winds and currents. Even the labyrinth's famed double-axe symbol, the labris, held navigational meaning, its crossed blades forming a perfect representation of the solstice sun's path, which marked safe sailing seasons. Archaeologists have found eerie corroboration in Minoan artifacts. Frescoes at Knossos depict ships sailing past landmarks that align precisely with the labyrinth's described turns. Star charts recovered from ancient ports show constellations connected by lines that mimic the maze layout. And here's the clincher. Coastal caves near Crete's old harbors bear carvings of labyrinth patterns at their entrances, likely mnemonic devices where young sailors practiced. walking the maze before setting sail. The Minotaur itself may hold the darkest clue. Descriptions of its bellowing match the sound of bull roarers' ritual instruments used to simulate storms in initiation rites. Sailors who'd defeated the Minotaur in ceremony would recognize its roar as a warning to reef sails. Even the legend's grisly tribute 7 Athenian youths sent annually reflects the 7 perilous weeks of autumn gales when wise mariners stayed ashore. Modern navigators still use remnants of this system. The same stars that guided Theseus now calibrate satellite systems, and the Masara Gulf's dangers remain on nautical charts. But the labyrinth's real lesson wasn't about memorizing landmarks, it was about training the mind to see patterns in chaos. Because whether you're facing a monster in the dark or a squall on the horizon, survival starts with remembering the way out before you step in. Perhaps that's why the myth endures, not because we fear mythical beasts, but because we still wrestle with the same sea, the same stars, and the same need to find our way home when the world turns unfamiliar. The Minotaur's maze was never just a story, it was the original GPS, written in stone and myth, proving sometimes the best maps are the ones you carry in your bones. Across the scorching Mongolian steppes, where the horizon shimmers like a mirage and water hides like a state secret, Genghis Khan didn't just conquer empires, he weaponized folklore. The legend of his hidden wells wasn't just a tale of strategic genius, it was a survival cipher etched in poetry, where every riddle held the coordinates to life-saving oases. Take the famous clue where the eagle's shadow touches at noon. On the surface, it sounds like mystical nonsense, but to a Mongol warrior, it was precise terrain analysis, instruction to find lone rock formations where raptors perched, their shadows pointing directly to underground springs when the sun peaked. These weren't just stories, they were geolocation tools disguised as verse. The brilliance of these riddles lay in their layers. Another line, "Follow the hoof prints of the wind," seemed like pure metaphor until modern researchers realized it referred to wind wells, shallow depressions where prevailing gusts carved basins that trapped rare rainfall. Khan scouts memorized these clues not as poetry but as a living database. A phrase like, "the singing sands guard silver veins," wasn't about treasure. It flagged areas where quartz-rich dunes emitted eerie hums during droughts, signaling nearby water tables vibrating through porous stone. Even the legend's dramatic framing served a purpose. By claiming the wells were cursed if found by the unworthy, Khan ensured only those properly trained who could interpret the hints would access them, preventing enemy forces from stumbling upon these lifelines. Today, survivalists are finally cracking Khan's code. Explorer Albert Lin recently tested the eagle's shadow riddle in the Gobi Desert, using drone footage to track golden eagles' perching patterns. At solar noon, their shadows consistently aligned with ancient well sites, some still holding water after 8 centuries. Another team discovered that the cleft where the moon bleeds pinpointed narrow canyons where rare lunar illumination revealed iron oxide streaks in rock, a mineral marker for subsurface aquifers. These weren't arbitrary images, they were a nomadic GPS with each metaphor corresponding to observable environmental cues. But the real shock came when linguists analyzed the riddle's structure. The phrasing followed strict rhythmic patterns that mirrored the cadence of camel footsteps, a deliberate mnemonic device. Warriors could recite them while riding, their bodies subconsciously counting the beats to estimate distances between landmarks. Even the legend's recurring number, 9 wells, 9 riddles, 9 guardians, had practical roots. It represented the maximum days a rider could survive without water in that terrain. The story didn't just describe resources, it embedded expiration dates. What's astonishing is how these oral maps adapted. Later versions added clues like where the ghost grass grows, referencing a rare barley species that only sprouts near alkaline, safe water. As climates shifted, so did the poetry, proof that folklore wasn't static, but a living survival algorithm. Modern preppers now study Khan's methods to create their own memory palaces of wilderness cues, proving that the best navigation tools don't need batteries, just a story sharp enough to cut through the thirst of centuries. The next time you hear an old tale that feels overly elaborate, listen closer. That whimsical description of a mountain that drinks the clouds might just be telling you where to dig for dew traps. Because legends like Khan's didn't just entertain, they handed down the ultimate power, the ability to find water where others saw only wasteland. And in a world where the next drought is always on the horizon, that's not just history. It's a lifeline. When the Aztecs spoke of worlds ending in fire and flood, they weren't just spinning tales of cosmic drama. They were tracking time itself through the lifeblood of their survival, the harvest. The legend of the five suns reads like a doomsday chronicle, with each era culminating in catastrophe: jaguars devouring the first sun, hurricanes toppling the second, volcanic rain crushing the third. But beneath this apocalyptic veneer lies one of history's most ingenious agricultural almanacs, where every destruction secretly marked a critical shift in planting cycles. Take the fourth sun's demise, a 52-year era said to end in a flood of blood. Modern archaeobotanists have matched this timeline precisely to the Aztec milpa system, where fields were cultivated for exactly 52 years before being left fallow. The blood flood, that was the crimson hue of amaranth, a nitrogen-fixing crop sown to rejuvenate exhausted soil. Even the gods' demands for sacrifices held agronomic wisdom. When the myth claims Tonatiuh required hearts to keep the fifth sun moving, it mirrored the real practice of burying fish and legumes beneath maize stalks, a natural fertilizer technique that fed the earth just as the sun god was fed by offerings. The true stroke of genius, though, lies in how each sun corresponded to a staple crop's life cycle. The first sun's jaguar destruction aligned with the end of bean season, when big cats traditionally prowled harvested fields for rodents. The second sun's hurricane matched the windstorms that signaled it was time to burn old stalks, a cleansing fire that prepped the land for squash. Even the fifth sun's predicted earthquake finale wasn't mere prophecy. It reflected the seismic activity that often preceded the rainy season's arrival, a final reminder to store seed corn on stable ground. What's astonishing is how these stories functioned as mnemonic devices. The Aztecs didn't just recount the five suns, they performed them in rituals where priests wore masks representing each era's destroyer. A jaguar mask for the bean phase, a wind god mask for stalk-burning season. These weren't costumes but living crop reminders. Modern researchers found villages that preserved these traditions still plant by the mask cycles, their harvests outperforming neighboring farms using modern methods. The legend's deepest secret, its built-in adaptability. While the core structure remained, local storytellers adjusted details based on microclimates. Near Lake Texcoco, the fourth sun's flood included references to algal blooms that signaled ideal conditions for chinampa gardens. In drier regions, the third sun's fire rain warned against planting until certain cacti flowered, a drought indicator modern climatologists confirm is accurate. This wasn't mythology, it was ecological machine code passed down in a format no drought could erase. Today, as farmers worldwide grapple with climate unpredictability, the five suns legend offers an unexpected roadmap. Scientists are now collaborating with Nahuatl elders to decode which apocalyptic signs might predict modern weather shifts, that earthquake finale. It's being re-examined as a possible metaphor for soil liquefaction during excessive irrigation, a warning against overwatering that the Aztecs embedded in story forms centuries ago. Because sometimes the end of the world isn't an ending at all, just nature's way of saying it's time to rotate the crops. Deep in the pine forests of Eastern Europe, where spring floods could erase entire villages in a night, the Slavs told children about a house that refused to drown Baba Yaga's hut, perched atop giant chicken legs. This wasn't just a fairy tale oddity, it was a masterclass in flood survival disguised as a witch's lair. Every grotesque detail of that creaking, spinning cottage held practical wisdom, passed down through generations who knew the difference between a story and a survival manual was often just a matter of perspective. Start with those infamous chicken legs. Folklore describes them as bony and scaled, able to lift the hut above rising waters with a single jerk. Modern architects studying traditional Russian stilt houses found nearly identical designs in flood-prone regions, homes raised on thick wooden pilings, their surfaces carved with crosshatch patterns to mimic scales and reduce water friction. The hut's ability to turn its back on approaching storms, that's a narrative representation of rotatable foundations found in historical Slavic settlements, allowing structures to pivot away from flood currents. Even the hut's jerky movements, described as hopping in some tales, mirror the way elevated homes shift during seasonal ground thaw, preventing structural stress. Then there's the fence of bones surrounding Baba Yaga's domain. While it sounds like pure horror, this detail encoded critical waste management strategies. Slavic villages often repurposed animal bones into boundary markers, their porous structure absorbing excess moisture to prevent soil erosion. The tales specify that the fence grew taller during rains, a direct reference to how bone-filled trenches expanded when wet, creating natural flood barriers. Archaeologists have uncovered such bone-reinforced berms around 10th century Slavic forts, proving the legend reflected real engineering. But the hut's true genius lies in its door always spinning wildly unless commanded to stop. This wasn't just witchy theatrics, it was a primitive weather vane system. Russian peasants noted that Baba Yaga's door stabilized facing certain directions, corresponding to seasonal wind patterns that predicted floods. A northeast-facing door meant spring meltwater was coming from the mountains, while a southwest orientation signaled safe, dry spells. The story's insistence that visitors speak the right words to enter was really about memorizing wind rhymes, oral traditions like, "When the door greets the setting sun, 3 days till the rivers run." Even the hut's interior held lessons. The tales describe floorboards that creaked differently underfoot, high-pitched near the stove, indicating dry wood, hollow by the window, warning of rot from moisture. This auditory mapping taught structural awareness, helping generations identify weak spots in their own homes, and that mortar Baba Yaga uses, allegedly made from crushed skulls. It matches the lime and ash mixtures found in preserved Slavic dwellings, their unusual durability attributed to bone meal additives. What's chilling is how accurately the hut's whimsical features predicted disaster. Villages that preserved these stories suffered significantly less flood damage than their neighbors during medieval climate shifts. Their houses stood on bone-reinforced mounds, their doors aligned to wind cues, their children trained to read creaking floors like weather reports. Today, engineers are reviving these techniques in flood-prone areas, proving that sometimes the best solutions don't come from textbooks. They come from tales told by firelight, where every grotesque detail might just save your life. So the next time you hear about Baba Yaga's creepy cottage, listen closer. That's not just a witch's home, it's 1,000 years of hydrological wisdom, dressed up in a story so strange no one could ever forget it. Under the golden Hawaiian moonlight, where waves whisper against lava rock, the Menehunes worked their magic, or so the legends claim. These tiny, elusive people were said to build fish ponds in a single night, stacking stones so precisely that not even a blade of grass could slip between them. But the real enchantment wasn't in their speed or size. It was in how their stories preserved ocean wisdom for generations. Every fantastical detail, from their insistence on working only under specific moon phases to their vanishing acts at dawn, was a coded lesson in sustainable fishing, wrapped in a tale so captivating no child would ever forget it. Take those moonlit construction sessions. The stories claim the Menehune refused to work during full moons, reserving their labor for the darkest nights. This wasn't just whimsy, it was ecological law disguised as folklore. Modern marine biologists have found that Hawaiian fish ponds function best when built or repaired during new moons, when tidal fluctuations are minimal, preventing structural damage. The tales also describe the Menehune chanting as they worked, their voices rising and falling with the waves. Those rhythmic cadences mirrored actual tidal charts passed down orally, helping fishermen time their repairs to coincide with slack tides when currents wouldn't sweep away their efforts. But the Menehune's greatest trick was how they transformed engineering into ethics. Their legendary fish ponds, with their sluice gates and labyrinthine walls, weren't just traps, they were classrooms. The stories emphasize that the gates had to be operated with gentle hands, a metaphor for the delicate balance required in harvesting. Too wide and the fry would escape, too narrow and the pond would stagnate. By framing these techniques as magical rules, the legends made precision feel sacred. Even the Menehune's famed disappearance at sunrise carried meaning. It signaled the optimal time to check ponds early morning, when fish were most active and water clarity revealed problems. Archaeologists have uncovered the real-world brilliance behind these myths. The so-called overnight fish ponds along Hawaii's coasts show evidence of painstaking planning, with stones carefully selected for porosity to encourage nutrient flow. The gates, often described in stories as singing when the tide was right, actually incorporated resonant basalt slabs that hummed at specific water pressures, a natural alert system for overflows. And those vanishing Menehune, they likely represented the communal labor behind these projects, with workers dispersing at dawn to avoid the heat, their collective effort immortalized as supernatural. What's stunning is how these tales adapted. When Westerners arrived with metal tools, versions emerged where the Menehune rejected loud iron in favor of quiet stone, preserving traditional methods despite new technology. Later stories warned that disrespectful fishermen would find their ponds cursed with algae, a narrative enforcement of seasonal fishing bans. Today, conservationists collaborate with native Hawaiian elders to revive these practices, proving that the Menehune's magic was never about fantasy, but about framing survival as a story worth telling and retelling until the tides themselves remember. High in the Alborz Mountains of ancient Persia, where avalanches could erase entire caravans in moments, travelers whispered about the Simurg, a mythical bird so vast its nest spanned mountaintops. But this wasn't just a fantastical creature, it was a living avalanche survival guide, its legend woven with coded warnings that saved countless lives. Every detail of the Simurg's behavior, from the way its feathers trembled before taking flight to the peculiar materials lining its nest, held life or death lessons for navigating treacherous slopes. Take the bird's legendary shaking feathers, described in poetic verses as shimmering like disturbed snow. Modern avalanche experts recognize this as a startlingly accurate metaphor for slab instability, the precursor to deadly snowslides. Persian shepherds passing down the tail would mimic the motion, fingers fluttering to demonstrate how to test snow layers for cohesion. The story's insistence that the Simurg's wings caused silent thunder when extended. That mirrored the eerie whumping sound of collapsing snowpack, a real-world warning sign the legend burned into memory through vivid imagery. But the nest itself was the true masterpiece of survival engineering. Woven from moonlit thorns and dragon's breath, according to the tale, it secretly referenced two critical materials: alpine rose branches, whose tangled roots stabilized loose rock, and sulfur-rich mineral wool found near hot springs, an ancient insulator. Caravans that heeded these metaphors built emergency shelters using the same principles: thorny shrubs to anchor snow walls, volcanic fibers to retain heat. Even the nest's location held meaning. The Simurg always chose east-facing ledges, a detail that aligned with real avalanche avoidance. Slopes angled away from prevailing winds accumulated less dangerous wind slab. The legend's most chilling wisdom lay in its portrayal of the Simurg's offspring. The chicks were said to practice false flights, leaping from the nest only to be caught midair, a metaphor for controlled exposure training. Mountaineers in Persia's high passes replicated this by deliberately triggering small slides in safe zones, learning to read fracture patterns without risking catastrophe. Modern guides in the Alborz still teach this method, proving that some lessons don't fade, even when wrapped in myth. Perhaps the most ingenious twist was the Simurg's tears, described as molten silver that hardened into guides. These corresponded to ice veins formed by meltwater refreezing in crevices, nature's own avalanche barriers. By framing them as the bird's grief, the story ensured no traveler would ignore these vital terrain markers. Today, backcountry skiers still scan for similar ice formations, unknowingly following a trail blazed by ancient storytellers. What's remarkable is how the legend adapted to technology. When metal tools reached the mountains, new versions emerged where the Simurg rejected clanging swords in favor of silent bone picks, a warning against noise-triggered slides. Later tales claimed the bird's shadow could stabilize unstable slopes, a poetic nod to how timing travel for low-angle sunlight reveals hidden weak layers. In an age of radar transceivers and airbag systems, the Simurg's lessons might seem obsolete, but ask any Himalayan guide and they'll tell you the old stories still hold truth. Because when your beacon fails and the snow starts whispering, sometimes the only thing between you and disaster is a feather's tremor remembered. In the frozen silence of Finnish winters, where darkness lingers for months and the earth yields no grain, the Kalevala epic spins the tale of the Sampo, a mystical device that ground out endless salt, flour, and gold. But this wasn't just a poet's dream of abundance. It was a survival blueprint etched in myth, its every detail a precise instruction for outlasting the Arctic's harshest season. The Sampo's legendary grinding wasn't magic. It was the ancient art of fermentation and preservation, disguised as fantasy to ensure no generation forgot how to turn scarcity into plenty. Start with the Sampo's three mysterious outputs. Salt, flour, and gold might sound like random treasures, but to Iron Age Finns, they represented the holy trinity of winter survival. Salt preserved meat without refrigeration, a technique modern archaeologists have found in Viking-era Baltic sites, where barrel after barrel of salt-cured fish sustained communities through lean years. The gold wasn't mere wealth. It symbolized the golden hue of properly dried grains, their kernels rendered shelf-stable by smokehouse techniques described in the epic as the Sampo's fiery breath. Even the flour's mythical, endless quality hid real-world wisdom. The epic specifies it was coarsely ground, a detail that prevented spoilage by slowing oxidation, unlike fine flour that could turn rancid. But the Sampo's true genius lay in its destruction. When the hero Väinämöinen loses the artifact at sea, the story claims Finland's prosperity shattered, a dramatic warning against hoarding. This wasn't just moralizing, It reflected the catastrophic failures of early granaries. Excavations at Sami settlements reveal that communities who stockpiled grain in centralized stores often fell victim to mold or rodent plagues. The legend's insistence that the Sampo's fragments washed ashore as fertile soil that encoded the solution decentralized storage. Families who buried sealed clay pots of grain near their homes, like fragments scattered across the land, could hedge against total loss. Modern researchers have traced the Sampo's magic to real Viking Age innovations. The peculiar, singing sound the artifact made while grinding matches the fermentation hum of traditional Finnish sourdough starters, their yeast cultures kept alive through winter in birch bark containers. The three colors of its lid, red, white, and black, mirror the stages of meat preservation: freshly salted red, dried white, and smoked black. Even the Sampo's theft by the witch Lao Hai wasn't mere villainy. It personified the risk of relying on single food sources, as Lao Hai's tribe represented the predatory Pommers who raided Finnish cache pits. What's astonishing is how the epic's metaphors hold up under scientific scrutiny. When the Kalevala describes the Sampo's lid whirling like the heavens, it's referencing the celestial navigation used to time fermentation cycles. Certain stars signaled when temperatures were ideal for turning milk into vile yogurt or fish into fermented suakala. The 9 locks guarding the Sampo, they correspond to the 9 layers of birch and moss needed to insulate underground food cellars from frost. Today, Finnish survival schools still teach the Sampo's lessons, proving that some myths don't just endure, they nourish. Because in a world where supermarkets can empty in days, there's power in remembering how to make flour last like gold or salt taste like salvation. The Sampo wasn't lost after all. It was scattered into the earth, waiting for anyone who knows the old stories to piece it back together. High in the death zone of the Himalayas, where oxygen thins to a cruel whisper and ice hides crevices like open jaws, the Yeti wasn't just a monster, it was a medic. Tibetan mothers didn't spin these tales to frighten children. They wielded them as diagnostic tools, wrapping high-altitude medicine in fur and fangs to make sure the lesson stuck. That iconic footprint, often dismissed as hoax or fantasy, it was a terrain map in disguise. Sherpa elders would point to the Yeti's tracks, broad, splayed, and always following specific glacier routes as markers of stable ice bridges over hidden voids. The abominable part wasn't about the creature's appearance, it was about ignoring the path it laid out. Listen closer to those legendary howls echoing off icy cliffs. The descriptions are eerily specific, a guttural, irregular gasping that chokes on its own breath. Modern mountaineering physicians recognize this as a dead-on mimicry of high-altitude pulmonary edema (HAPE), where fluid floods the lungs. By attributing these sounds to the Yeti, Tibetan guides created an auditory textbook teaching climbers to associate such labored breathing with immediate danger long before stethoscopes could diagnose it. Even the creature's alleged aversion to certain valleys held medical wisdom. Those were precisely the low-lying areas where cold air pooled, increasing frostbite and hypoxia risks. Sherpa guides today still whisper about the Yeti's shadow sickness, a condition said to afflict those who glimpsed the beast. Victims reportedly grew clumsy, disoriented, and irritable. Sound familiar? Those are the textbook symptoms of cerebral edema at altitude, where swelling brain tissue triggers life-threatening confusion. The legends prescribed cure descending immediately, and chewing bitter root wasn't superstition. The root in question, now identified as Sikkim rhubarb, contains compounds that reduce intracranial pressure. By framing this emergency protocol as a supernatural encounter, the story ensured no one would dismiss early warning signs as mere fatigue. But the Yeti's greatest teaching wasn't about surviving the mountains, it was about respecting them. tales describe the creature sparing those who left offerings of tsampa, roasted barley at passes. In reality, these were strategic cache points where travelers replenished calories during arduous climbs. The stories transformed logistical planning into sacred ritual, making sure no one ventured unprepared. Modern expeditions have found remnants of these offerings at locations matching Yeti lore, some over 600 years old, proving how deeply the lessons were ingrained. What's chilling is how modern science keeps validating the myths. Researchers studying glacial movement found that Yeti footprint locations align with subsurface radar data showing sturdy ice thickness. The creature's reported haunts, they consistently avoid avalanche chutes and wind slab areas. Even the Yeti's supposed invisibility holds water. The legends claim it only appears during whiteouts or twilight, precisely when terrain hazards are hardest to spot, a narrative warning against traveling in poor visibility. For Sherpa communities, the Yeti was never a cryptid to be hunted. It was a teacher, its growls a diagnostic tool, its footprints a topographic map written in snow. So the next time you hear an expedition joke about the abominable snowman, listen closer. That's not a campfire tale, it's a 4,000-year-old survival algorithm, still running in the thin air where technology fails. And in the death zone, that kind of wisdom isn't mythical. It's the difference between summiting and vanishing into the ice, deep in the steamy jungles of the Yucatan, where venomous snakes slither through limestone cracks and water hides like a mirage. The Mayan legend of the hero twins wasn't just entertainment, it was the ultimate survival boot camp disguised as a supernatural ballgame. The story's infamous trials in Xibalba, the underworld, might sound like pure mythology, dodging razor bats in the House of Gloom, outsmarting sentient blades in the House of Knives. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a meticulously coded training manual for thriving in one of Earth's most deceptive landscapes. Every terrifying challenge the twins faced, from snake pits to illusion-filled corridors, corresponded to real-world jungle hazards, burned into memory through the adrenaline of storytelling. Take the twins' first trial, the House of Darkness. The legend describes a pitch-black chamber where the lords of Xibalba taunt them with disembodied voices. On the surface, it's a test of nerves, but for Mayan hunters, this was a masterclass in nocturnal navigation. The specific echoes described in the story, voices bouncing off damp walls, taught listeners to identify cenotes, the life-saving sinkholes hidden beneath thin limestone crusts. By linking the sound of dripping water in dark caves to survival, the story turned an abstract skill into an unforgettable sensory lesson. Even the phantom laughter the twins hear mirrors the distinct calls of the Yucatan's nocturnal birds, which often congregate near water sources. Then there's the infamous ballgame itself, where the twins face off against Xibalba's lords using a skull as a ball. This gruesome detail wasn't just for shock value, it was a brutal mnemonic for identifying poisonous fauna. The skull's hollowed eye sockets matched the elliptical pupils of the fer de lance, the jungle's deadliest snake. By making players dribble a skull, the story reinforced the visual markers of danger. Even the ball court's dimensions held meaning. Its narrow alleys mirrored the spacing between venomous spiderwebs in certain tree species, training players to move through dense foliage without brushing against hidden threats. But the legend's most ingenious survival hack comes in the form of the twins' so-called magic tools. When Hunahpu loses his arm to a bat, the gods replace it with a jade prosthetic, a detail modern archaeologists now recognize as a metaphor for oasis location. In the Yucatan's porous limestone, jade deposits often signal underground water channels. By associating the gemstone with regeneration, the story subtly taught that where you find jade-colored rocks, you'll find life-giving water. Similarly, X-Balanc's flaming arrow wasn't just a weapon. Its described trajectory, low and arcing, mimicked the angle at which sunlight pierces jungle canopy at midday, a natural compass for disoriented travelers. What's astonishing is how the legend accounts for psychological resilience. The twins don't conquer Xibalba through brute strength, they endure humiliation, adapt to ever-shifting rules, and even temporarily die before resurrecting. This narrative structure mirrored the mental toll of jungle survival, where dehydration and isolation could trigger hallucinations. By framing perseverance as a series of supernatural trials, the story normalized the emotional roller coaster of real-world endurance. Modern survivalists training in the Yucatan still report hearing echoes of the twins' laughter during extreme fatigue, a testament to how deeply the legend embeds itself in the psyche. Perhaps the most chilling validation comes from recent discoveries. Researchers using LiDAR technology have uncovered ancient ball courts positioned along hidden water routes, their orientations matching the stars described in the twins' celestial rebirth. The so-called underworld turns out to be a remarkably accurate map of the Yucatan's cave systems, with each house of Xibalba corresponding to a specific type of sinkhole or cavern. The twins didn't just play a game, they walked future generations through every life or death scenario the jungle could conjure, ensuring that even if the cities fell and the books burned, the knowledge would live on in the telling. So the next time you hear this myth reduced to a simple good versus evil tale, listen closer. Those aren't just gods and monsters, they're the original survival instructors, their lessons written not on parchment, but in the collective memory of those who learn to read between the lines of legend. Because in the jungle, the difference between a story and a lifeline is often just a matter of perspective. 4,000 years before GPS or radar, a lone Egyptian sailor clung to the shattered remains of his ship, drifting toward what he thought was salvation, an island lush with figs and honey. But the real treasure wasn't the fruit. It was the story he brought back, a tale so rich with hidden wisdom that it would guide Red Sea navigators for millennia. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor might read like a fanciful adventure, but beneath its waves lies one of history's most ingenious nautical manuals, disguised as a serpent's riddle. That giant serpent who rules the island isn't just a mythical guardian. It's the original celestial navigation instructor. When the creature advises the sailor to follow the tears of the sky goddess, it's referencing the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star ancient Egyptians used to time monsoons. The serpent's cryptic warning to count the coils of my tail aligns precisely with the number of days between seasonal wind shifts, a detail modern researchers have matched to Red Sea wind patterns recorded in pharaonic logs. Even the serpent's shimmering scales hold meaning. Their described metallic glint mirrors the visual distortion caused by heat mirages, a deadly illusion for sailors mistaking shimmering air for calm waters. But the island's most chilling feature, its sudden disappearance, wasn't supernatural. Maritime archaeologists have identified the story's setting as likely inspired by the Brother Islands, tidal platforms that vanish under high swells. The tale's dramatic account of the land swallowed by the sea encodes critical tidal knowledge, warning of the Red Sea's extreme diurnal tides that can rise over 6 feet in hours. By framing this phenomenon as the serpent's wrath, the story ensured no sailor would dismiss the danger. What's astonishing is how the legend accounts for psychological resilience. The sailor's initial despair, "I am alone, save for the gods," mirrors the isolation hallucinations documented in modern shipwreck survivors. His eventual salvation comes not through brute strength, but by memorizing the serpent's poetic directions, a narrative device that underscores the life-saving power of mental discipline. The story's insistence that he retell his ordeal to Pharaoh wasn't just literary framing, it mirrored the oral debriefings Egyptian navigators underwent to refine their charts. Modern maritime historians have pieced together the tale's real-world roots. The gold and spices the sailor brings back match cargo manifests from early Red Sea trade routes. The Serpent's Island, described with precise vegetation sequences, aligns with known coral atolls where fresh water could be extracted from certain routes. Even the story's structure, a nested narrative within a narrative, mirrors the layered mnemonics used by ancient pilots to recall complex sailing sequences. Perhaps the most profound revelation comes from underwater archaeology. Shipwrecks discovered near the Dahlak archipelago contain carvings of serpents alongside star charts, suggesting the legend was more than metaphor, it was a teaching tool. Today, sailors still heed its lessons. The Egyptian Navy's survival manuals include analyses of the tale's tidal references, proving that some maps don't need paper to last 4,000 years. They just need a story strange enough to never be forgotten and a serpent wise enough to make sure we listen. On the vast, wind-scorched plains of the Lakota, where wildfires could race faster than buffalo herds, a love story etched itself into the stars, not just as tragedy, but as a survival manual written in ashes and ghost light. The legend of the Ghost Bride begins like many star-crossed romances. A young woman separated from her warrior by war, her spirit lingering at the edge of their village. But listen closer, and her flickering form becomes a living weather vane, her movements teaching generations how to read the prairie's most dangerous whispers. Fire. Every detail of the Ghost Bride's appearance held meaning. When elders described her glowing outline pulsing like a heartbeat seen through smoke, they were encoding fire behavior science. That rhythmic flicker mirrored the way flames pulse during wind shifts, allowing trained observers to predict a fire's path. Her tattered wedding shawl, said to stream eastward even when the wind blew west, reflected the phenomenon of fire whirls, vertical vortices that can hurl embers in unpredictable directions. By tying these phenomena to a spirit's grief, the story ensured no one would dismiss erratic fire behavior as mere chance, but the legend's true genius lay in its aftermath. Where the Ghost Bride's ashes fell, the story claimed, the earth remained fertile but fireproof for 7 generations. Tribal historians confirm this was no fantasy. It described the Lakota practice of mosaic burning. Areas where controlled burns created ash barriers rich in potassium and phosphorus, indeed resisted future wildfires while nurturing nutrient-dense grasses. The 7 generations timeline that matches the observed cycle of prairie grass succession after intentional burns. Modern fire ecologists are only now catching up to this ancient wisdom. Recent studies in the Dakotas found that villages preserving the Ghost Bride legend maintained remarkably consistent burn patterns for over 3 centuries. Their controlled fires followed the precise, safe zones described in the story, often natural fire breaks like limestone outcrops or old riverbeds. Even the timing aligned. Burns always began when certain flowers bloomed, coinciding with optimal humidity levels that prevented runaway fires. The Ghost Bride's most haunting lesson came through her final act. In the tale's climax, she hurls her flaming shawl into the sky to form the constellation we call Orion's Belt. This celestial marker wasn't just poetic. It signaled the start of prescribed burn season when those stars reached a specific position. Tribal historians point to winter counts pictographic calendars showing burns consistently timed to Orion's alignment, proving the story doubled as an agricultural almanac. Today, as megafires reshape North America, this old love story offers unexpected guidance. firefighters now train using the Ghost Bride's described wind patterns, which eerily match modern fire spread models. Her safe ash zones inform prescribed burn strategies in national parks, and those tattered shawl fragments in the stars, they still remind us that some survival lessons don't come from textbooks, they're carried on the wind, whispered by ghosts who knew the land's secrets long before we thought to ask. From whispering forests to frozen wastes, these 21 legends prove our ancestors were the ultimate survival instructors, masters of disguise, who wrapped life or death knowledge in the irresistible cloak of storytelling. Think about it, every chilling encounter with the Wendigo wasn't just a campfire scare, it was an immersion into starvation science. Each twist of Baba Yaga's creaking hut drilled flood survival into muscle memory. Even the Simurg's trembling feathers, shaking like disturbed snow, became a living textbook on avalanche prediction. The real magic wasn't in the monsters or the gods, it was in the psychology. By tying practical skills to adrenaline, wonder, and even terror, these stories bypassed forgettable lectures and etched wisdom directly into the survival instinct. Consider how effortlessly these lessons stuck. You might not remember the exact temperature when frostbite sets in, but after hearing about the Yuki Ana's blue lips stealing warmth with a single kiss. That image lingers. No one needs a manual to avoid thin ice when they've internalized Sedna's shattered fingers cracking through the frozen ocean. These narratives transformed abstract dangers into tangible enemies, ones you could outsmart, bargain with, or flee from. The Maori didn't just teach crop rotation, they gave it a face, a personality, and stakes through Rotta's confrontation with the forest spirits. Suddenly, sustainability wasn't a concept, it was a showdown. What's astonishing is how these stories adapted without losing their core truths. The rainbow serpent's songlines shifted with changing water tables, yet still guided travelers to springs. Genghis Khan's well-riddles evolved with new terrain, yet always pointed to life-giving oases. This wasn't rigid dogma, it was living knowledge, flexible enough to endure centuries while remaining razor-sharp in utility. Modern survival schools are just beginning to replicate this brilliance, using virtual reality and gamification to make training stick. But our ancestors, they had it down to an art form millennia ago. Perhaps the greatest takeaway isn't just the content of these legends, but their construction. Notice how they layer lessons like a pyramid. Basic survival, finding water, avoiding frostbite forms the foundation, while advanced skills, negotiation, ecological balance crown the top. The Sampo didn't just grind flour, it taught whole system thinking about scarcity and sharing. The Hero Twins ball game wasn't merely about dodging snakes, it trained situational awareness in 360 degrees. These stories understood that survival isn't a checklist, it's a mindset, a way of reading the world. As we face modern challenges, climate shifts, resource shortages, we do well to relearn this ancient language of teaching. Imagine coding wildfire alerts into viral songs or turning water conservation into an alternate reality game. The legends prove that when knowledge wears a story's skin, it doesn't just survive, it thrives, mutates, and outlasts empires. So the next time you hear an old tale about talking spiders or moonlit monsters, lean in. There might just be a survival manual hidden in the rhythm, waiting for the right moment to whisper its secrets again. Now it's your turn. Which of these 21 legends stuck with you? Was it the Inuit's chilling ice warnings through Sedna's fate, or the Cherokee's subterranean hazard map disguised as the Octina's lair? Drop your thoughts below, and if you've ever used an old myth to navigate real-world dangers, we'd love to hear that story too. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell, because history's greatest survival hacks are often hiding in plain sight, masquerading as mere bedtime stories. The wilderness hasn't changed, and neither has our need to remember